What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown. This is Scarcity Financial. I have a question for you. Do you think that intellectual property should be considered property? Because the idea of property rights and having ownership over something is to protect something that is fundamentally scarce. Because things like, say, your houses are fundamentally scarce. There's one of your house. And if somebody else wants to use your house, they are encroaching on using your house instead of you. Contrast this with a magical universe where all you had to do was think a new house into existence. There could be an infinite number of the exact same houses. And if somebody wanted to use your house, it wouldn't actually be using yours. Their mind would spontaneously create an exact replica into existence an infinite amount of times, and they could just use that one instead. Well, in that magical universe, property rights would be useless because there's no need to protect ownership of something unless there is some element of scarcity. A real-world example of this that gets close to infinite in practice is breathable air, is oxygen. For most people on Earth, the amount of air that is available to breathe is in practice infinite. I know it's not actually infinite, but you're never going to run out of air just by breathing. But as the author of The Price of Tomorrow, Jeff Booth, points out, when you go underwater, suddenly air does become scarce. And that's why it costs money, because accessing oxygen that is available for you to breathe is difficult and scarce underwater. So you have to buy it and have it stored in tanks from somebody who's doing that as a job. I know this isn't a perfect analogy, but it highlights the difference between something physical with scarcity and something infinite like an idea. And in practice, when you apply scarcity-driven laws to something that is infinite, you end up creating more problems than you solve. So here's one problem. If I have an idea, it is impossible to prove the origin of that idea because every idea I have is a product of the things that I have learned from somebody else, from someplace else. And that it goes for everything that those people have all learned as well. So when you're trying to track down original ownership, the source of an idea, in practice, not possible. Further, let's say I do have a unique idea. Right now, pops into my mind spontaneously. Nobody else has ever had that idea in history. There's no encroachment on me if that idea spontaneously pops into everybody's mind at the exact same time. I am no worse off. Very different than me choosing to use my house versus the entire world choosing to use my house. It's physical, there are limitations on it, it is not infinite, and therefore when somebody else uses my property, it encroaches on me. So property rights are there to protect usage of something that belongs to me. But ideas can't belong to anybody. And worse than that, many times intellectual property laws actually encroach on physical property rights. I'll give you a crazy example. If I use my money that I own, it belongs to me, to buy a knife and a chicken from the grocery store, and I decide that I want to cut that chicken up in a very specific way to make small pieces of chicken. And then I decide I want to go out into the marketplace and sell those pieces of chicken that I cut up with my own property, that I purchased with my own property. And somebody else then decides they want to freely exchange their property, their money, for my chicken pieces that I cut up. Most people would say, sure, you can do that. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? That'd be preposterous to think that two individuals exercising their free rights over their own property would not be able to engage in that. But this practice might actually be illegal through very specific intellectual property laws. Because yes, patents on methods and techniques for cutting up chicken actually exist. In fact, one man alone in his life has held over 40 patents on methods and techniques of cutting up chicken. And if you cut up your chicken in the way that he patented and tried to sell it to somebody else, that would be illegal. Absolute insanity. And this demonstrates something that is normally overlooked about patents. Many say that patents allow inventors and startups a way to circumvent monopolies and not get crushed by large competitors. But in practice, the express purpose of a patent is to create a monopoly on that product or service because it prevents anybody else from engaging in that specific activity. That's a monopoly. Now, still on the surface, it might sound like a good idea, giving the little guy a chance. But what ends up happening in practice is massive competition specifically for regulatory capture. Millions of dollars spent on research and development, legal costs, basically just for the purpose of wielding the government's monopoly on violence to prevent competition. Use the government to create their own little legal monopoly. So all the competitive forces out there are redirected towards regulatory capture instead of what they should be for, which is improving for the customer. Now, if this is true, you would expect to see a very low correlation between the number of patents that a company has and real innovation for the real world. So let's take a look at who held the most patents for 2020. In 2020, this might come as a shock, IBM had the most patents by a long shot. What about 2019? Interesting. IBM again. What about 2018? IBM. And I won't go through them all because it would get very boring very quickly, but for the last 28 years, IBM has held the record for having the most patents every single year for 28 years straight. I bet some of you didn't even know IBM still existed anymore. Name the last innovation that has been impactful and meaningful for the average consumer coming from IBM. In fact, name the last time you even used an IBM product. Intellectual property laws stifle innovation by redirecting resources towards regulatory capture and away from improving the product for the consumer. They help consolidate power, consolidate monopolies to those with the power, to those with the resources, and the proximity to the power. And then the question comes up, what do you do about the cheaters? The ones who just ignore those intellectual property laws, because ultimately they're just laws which comes down to jurisdiction. And there's a country across the pond who is notorious for just flat out ignoring patents, creating knockoffs. So there are a few results that happen from this. Number one, the ones who must follow the rules are punished. Let's say in the United States, there are two companies that are making earphones. One company has a patent on a very specific type of earphone. That means the second company that's in the United States cannot compete there. There's a legal monopoly on that type of headphone. But there's a Chinese company who just says, we don't care. We're going to make knockoffs. We're going to make the exact same things, and we're going to make them better, which now we get into the impact for the consumer. Number one, by that one person cheating, that one company cheating over in a place that doesn't follow the patent laws, the consumer is benefited because suddenly you have competition. You have the identical product being sold at a cheaper price. That's better for the consumer. Now you're saying, but wait. No. It's not actually better for the consumer because it's a cheaper product made out of cheaper materials. The quality's not there. Well, guess what? The consumer still wins then because they realize that's a $5 knockoff. I'm going to spend $100 on the real thing because it's much better quality. If that's the situation, then the company that had the monopoly would not have been negatively impacted by that patent not being there because people are going to choose their product anyway because it's better. But third, the consumer ultimately is impacted negatively by the unseen instead of the seen, which is all of the other companies all around the world not competing, not trying to innovate, not trying to make that product better because they legally can't because there's a monopoly on making that product. So the consumer is negatively impacted by what they could have gotten that they can't because of the laws preventing it. And so because of this, as a final note, I'd like to do kind of like a little thought experiment here. Imagine patents didn't exist. 100% of competition would have to be directed towards improving something for the customer, whether that's your relationship with the customer, whether that's making the product a higher quality, whether that's making that same product at a cheaper price, whatever it is. All of the R&D, all the money, all the resources would have to be spent toward actually competing for the customer, for the consumer. So not only do you not have the wasted resources on filing for patents, all the legal costs trying to get that regulatory capture, but you're also pouring all those resources into something that's beneficial for the consumer, cheaper things at higher qualities. And finally, you get all the competition, all the innovation, slowly iterating on things over time instead of having a legal monopoly on something that stifles innovation because you don't have to, you get the customers no matter what. It would be a much better world for the consumer, which, by the way, is everybody. Even if you produce something in every other area of your life, You are the consumer. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you think I'm wrong, there's probably some big holes or some things that I'm missing, things I haven't considered here. I'm not saying that I'm extremely confident this is 100% true. I want to hear your feedback, your critiques, your criticism, your thoughts in the comments section below. And finally, if you're still watching, I'm going to be in Denver on January 8th. And if you can be there, I would love to see you there. It's free. It's just a meet and greet, question and answer kind of hangout thing. Very low key. No ticket cost or anything like that. If you're going to show up, sign up with my link in the description below just so that we can get a head count. It's going to be myself, the Economic Ninja, plenty of others. It'll be a really fun time, just one evening, hanging out, talking, getting to know you guys. Would love to see you there. Let me know if you can go. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.